Welcome, everyone. You're listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast on Mental Health News Radio Network. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Lori Liepinstock, host of a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast on Mental Health News Radio Network. Today's guest is Erin Williamson, Chief Programs and Strategy Officer at Love146, an organization dedicated to combating child trafficking and exploitation. With over 2 decades of experience working directly with victims of crime, Erin has led the development of comprehensive programs at Love146, including prevention, education, survivor care, supporting over 900 youth. And as a mother herself, she brings a unique perspective on how evolving threats from technology to trafficking impact today's parents. Erin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
And we were just talking about it. I typically cover, human trafficking in January for Human Trafficking Awareness Month, but there's just been so much in the news out there with P. Diddy, former CEO of Abercrombie, even going back to like R. Kelly, and then just so many. I've read so many cases in Houston and then cases where law enforcement is actually involved with the human trafficking. It's astounding to me. So I felt like this was very important to talk about.
Yeah, it really is. It does seem to be coming up in the news a lot more. It seems to be happening almost, on a weekly basis. We're hearing about some sort of high profile individual being arrested in relation to this crime. And we're not even necessarily hearing about all of the lower level individuals that are also being arrested and prosecuted for this crime. So it does seem to be both happening and more and getting more attention. So there's kind of the mixed feelings of I'm glad that people are paying more attention. I'm glad we're seeing accountability through our court systems and law enforcement. And wow, this really is happening at a level that seems unprecedented and just seems to have really grown post-pandemic.
Is it something that's unprecedented, or has this been going on, it just hasn't gotten as much attention?
It's really hard to know that. There is not good baseline data on how much trafficking there is. In part, that's because it's really a hidden and misunderstood crime, right? There's a lot of kids that come into our survivor care program who have experienced really horrific trafficking victimization and aren't even familiar with that crime, right? They might think that they were raped. They might think that they made bad choices, right? They might still be blaming themselves for some of what has happened. And it's really not until we walk them through what is the exchange of a commercial act or the exchange of a sexual act for a commercial, whether that's money or shelter or a place to stay, how that falls under the legal definition of human trafficking. And when they're under 18, you don't even have to have force, fraud, or coercion. And we really have to help kids understand that traffickers, there's a whole grooming and recruitment process. Traffickers don't announce themselves. They don't walk into your life either in the real world or online and say, I'd like to introduce myself, in a couple of months, I'm going to exploit you. They really do groom and recruit. And it's really important for both children and parents to understand that process, both to prevent trafficking and then if exploitation is occurring, to understand how to support that child, as well as themselves as parents, as they kind of recover from that form of victimization.
And yeah, you talk about grooming because I know that there are so many people out there that are like, okay, human trafficking, that is a complete stranger just jumping out of a bush and coming to get you and throw you in their car. And I'm not saying that that doesn't happen, but I feel like that's what people really see as human trafficking, which is not true at all because it's a whole process and it's very manipulative. Can you go through that and what grooming can look like?
Absolutely. And you're right. It's not the movie Taken. It's not, other Hollywood portrayals of what trafficking looks like. Really, what traffickers do is they try to find a vulnerability for a child. And for some children, that might be that, there's housing insecurity at home, there's food insecurity. For some kids who are involved in the child welfare system, that might be that they want to experience a family, they want to experience love. For other individuals, it's the desire for a romantic relationship. It's maybe a parental figure that is incarcerated. It really can be a wide range of things. We've even had kids from two-parent, more affluent families. Their vulnerability was that their parents were never around, right?
Mm.
And they spent a lot of their time on technology, and their exploiter found them online and really formed a relationship with them online that their parents had no idea about, because again, their parents were not present and it was happening on a screen that their parents were not really seeing what was happening. So, really what traffickers do is they identify what is the vulnerability for that child, and then they spend a lot of time building a relationship with that child. So again, the idea of stranger danger isn't going to work here, because for these kids, by the time they're being exploited, these aren't strangers. These are their best friend. These are their boyfriend. This is the person who has promised them the love or the family that they've always wanted and needed. And then that trafficker promises them the world, right?
Mm.
I can be your father. I can be that person in your life. You will never go hungry with me. You will never wonder where your next meal comes from, right? I will give you the attention. And then at some point, there's a switch that happens. And sometimes that switch happens gradually. It can be things like, if you love me, this is what you would do for me. If you really wanted us to build our own life together, we have to figure out how to run away. We have to figure out a way to be together. So come away with me, run away with me. Sometimes it can be through something like called sextortion, right? Where they get that child to send them an explicit image. And then they're saying things like, what would your parents think if this image got sent out? What if I emailed them this image and I told them that you and I had been talking for the last 3 months and they didn't know? And sometimes they'll even use the parents against the child as part
Mm.
of that grooming and recruitment process, thinking that, oh, that child will think to themselves, my parents always told me I should never share an image, and now I have, they're going to be so mad. I have to now continue to hide this, putting them at greater risk.
Wow. You talked briefly about technology. You mentioned technology, which I think is a huge thing because for people who like for groomers, it's not a huge they're not thinking like the grooming's coming from technology, but it really is. And I've heard from surprising places, from games, from things as popular as Roadblocks. Could you focus on technology? Because I think this is a big one for parents to really understand.
Absolutely. And I will just, I'll disclose that I have a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old. My kids play those games. They play Roblox, they play Fortnite. My youngest one doesn't play Fortnite, but it does play Roblox. Technology is really hard, right? It has a lot of benefits, right? I don't want to negate the benefits of technology, right?
Right.
During COVID, technology was a great way for kids to be in touch with family members and with friends. I can see my 12-year-old socializing a lot with his friends as they play these games. It has had wonderful benefits, but the perpetrators go where the kids are. And the predators know that kids play these games. They know kids are on social media. They know kids are on Discord. They know kids are on all sorts of places. And the reality is that wherever kids are, the predators are going to go. And, it's really important to start these conversations at a much younger age. Ideally, you're starting the
Mhm.
conversations before your kids go on the technology. Although I know that that's not always the case. And sometimes parents are having to kind of quickly backtrack and have conversations that they wish they had had up front. But talking to them about who is a friend in the online or gaming world, right? Who are you allowed to talk to and play with? And then also, and inevitably, what I have to say to parents is so important is to do the what happens if you don't follow my rules, right? So what
Yeah.
happens if you do start talking to someone that I told you weren't supposed to, right? And one of the things I say to my kids is, look, I'm going to tell you all of these rules. And I know that part of adolescence as you get older is going to be that you might break some of these rules, right? You might not do everything I always tell you. And so, what I also want you to know is that when you break those rules and you find yourself in a dangerous situation, it's more important for me that you come to me and you tell me and we figure it out together than that you broke that rule, right? I really want you to know you can come to me even if you break one of these rules.
I feel in my head like, oh, this is something that they should know. But now I feel like when I see them today, I'm probably going to have this conversation with them because I feel like that is a big one. Because like you were saying, traffickers can use it against you. And as long as, you have that safe relationship with your children, right? That should be enough to keep them safe, I'd like to think.
Yeah, and one of the I mean, it's one of the things I always tell my kids and really reinforce. So what I will say is you can never have these conversations too much, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, even if you think they already know, even if you've already had that conversation, have it again, right? Reinforce it. But one of the things I really emphasize with my kids is we don't have secrets in our family. And if
Mm-hmm.
anybody asks you, can you keep a secret? I want you to tell them we don't have secrets in my family. Because again, the predators are going to look for which children know how to keep a secret, which children they think are not going to tell and share. To be honest, one of the highest risks for trafficking is prior sexual abuse. And
Mm.
part of why that's such a high risk for trafficking is because in a predator's mind, well, this kid already knows what's expected of them. And this kid probably already knows how to keep a secret, right? So one of the things I think you're right that's really important to do is to create that bond with your children, and also to help your children share how important and strong that bond is with any potential predator, right? So saying things like, we don't keep secrets in my family, tells a potential predator, I need to move on. This is not a child that's going to keep this secret.
I like that. I really like that. And I feel like you just gave me like advice that I need to like take into account in the next hour when my children get home. Um, but when you said Roblox, right? We talk those games where, you do talk to strangers or you do play with strangers. Um, is it better to just tell the kids like we're not going to play games with strangers, or is it just having that conversation?
And I think some of this is a different rules at different ages, right?
Mm,
So at young ages, like where my children are now, our rule is you don't have conversations with people you don't know in the real world, right? You
okay.
just don't.
Yeah.
You don't play that game. Now, you might play against someone, right? Again, like Fortnite is an example where there's, 100 players in a game, but his team that's all communicating has to be people he's known online. Has to be. And I said, we've gone through, right? You might have somebody vouch for somebody else, but I don't know that their parents talk to them the way I talked with you, right? So your friend might say, oh, no, 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 I play with so and so all the time, they're cool, I vouch for them. You don't know if they've met that person in real life. You don't know who that person is. That person could be an adult. That person could have, a voice changer. You really
Mm,
have no idea who that individual is. So our rule for our family right now is that you only play with people you know. Now, as they get older, 16, 17, maybe those rules will loosen up. At some point, our goal for our children is that they leave our house, that they
right.
function in the real world, that they know how to keep themselves safe or as safe as possible, and that we have given them those skills. So, I do think it's important that as kids get older, that rules change with the age of the kids. And I think it's important that we recognize as parents, kids are going to make mistakes. And in some ways, it's better for them to make some mistakes when they're still in our household,
Right.
right? And we can still walk them through those consequences and what that might mean and turn it into more of an educational opportunity.
Right. Your kids and my kids too. I have a 6 and a 9-year-old, and they're in this phase where they're trying to get a little bit more independence, more so the 9-year-old. But you know, walking home from the bus stop or walking to a friend's house. We live in the city, so I think it gets a little difficult for us to make those decisions on, and let them just go on their own. But I mean, it can be scary, right? There is that fear. I know that a lot of the grooming is recently is more online, but then, and we talked about, like, there aren't those people, it's the stranger danger being an issue totally, but I guess it can be.
Yeah.
Um, how do we give our children that space for them to grow and become independent, and also keep them safe from traffickers?
It is really hard. And I'll say, as someone who used to live in a city and now lives in a more rural area, we have different issues, but also the same, right? When my kids walk home from school, they don't have all of these other adults around watching them who could intervene, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes
Hmm.
they're the only person, right, walking from the bus stop home. And so, I think about, well, what happens if someone does drive up? Will anyone ever see that happened and occurred, right? So I do think that, we're all parents that have many of the same fears, no matter where we live, where our kids live. And I think the reality is that, or what I just keep telling myself as I go through these years is, the reality is most kids who are kidnapped by people they know, meaning
Mm,
kidnapped by parents. They're kidnapped who are going through horrific divorces or separations. They're, kidnapped. The stranger danger is still so uncommon. And what I don't want to have it happen to my child is that they're afraid of the world, or that
right.
they feel the world is a dangerous place. Like, I want my kids to grow up and to be explorers of this world. I want them to grow up thinking that people are generally good people, right? Not everybody is good, and you do need to know what red flags are. And we talk about following your instinct, and what red flags could look like. But I don't want to make them so terrified of this world that they grow up with massive anxiety and are not willing to take risks in their lives. Because I think that's one of the wonderful things about living, is taking risks and being willing to have new experiences.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I know that there are fears of, letting kids go to the bathroom on their own. I mean, my kids are always like, I can go to the bathroom on my own. It's like literally right there. And then there are other parents who are just like, I don't know what's going on in that bathroom. I'm coming with you. And so that, like, it gets a little tricky there, I feel like. And it's but I do agree. I feel like I don't want my child to be terrified of the world. And you mentioned red flags. So I wanted to ask, like, what are the red flags that we talk to our children about?
So one of the first things I talk to my kids about is kind of that yucky feeling in your stomach, right? You might get an icky feeling where something just seems off and you don't know why, but somebody's kind of creeping you out, or something doesn't feel right about someone. You just got to trust that, right? I would rather have you be kind of rude to somebody and walk away from somebody, even an adult, even someone that's supposed to be, someone that you listen to, if you're getting that yucky feeling, right? And
Mm,
then come and talk to me about it, right? Because we need to figure this out. If that yucky feeling is coming from someone like, someone in your religious community, or a teacher or a coach, right? We need to like brainstorm and figure this out. If that yucky feeling is coming from somebody you passed, in the grocery store that you might not see again, then, that's okay. We don't necessarily need to brainstorm, but I want you to trust that yucky feeling no matter who it is. And then I really do, talk to them about slowly. Like, most people are really good people that want to help kids. But there are some times where adults and even other kids sometimes are not safe people for kids to be around. And if you hear someone's unsafe or if someone tells you that they've been hurt, I want you to know that that does sometimes happen. And again, I don't go into really a lot of detail. I don't go into, now I will say my oldest, who's 12 now, just got a phone. And I did have the conversation where I said to him, if you're old enough to get a phone, you're old enough to have a really honest conversation about what mommy does for work. And we had a really honest conversation about pornography and what he should do if he comes, I said, you can't unsee something. So if you're
Hmm.
not sure if you should be looking, swipe as fast as you can. I said, because you can never unsee something, but who cares if you missed one video, right?
Right.
There'll be another YouTube short coming right up. Um, and I do think that if you're giving your kid access to certain technology, you need to also prepare them for the fact that they are going to come across things and potentially people that are unsafe, and give them pointers for what they should do, like swipe or shut a conversation off or turn off their phone, leave the room, things like that.
As a parent, do you monitor his phone, or is that something that you suggest for other parents?
So I do. And again, I would say that this is, a rule that changes with age. So we chose to get our kid what's called the Bark phone. I will say there's a great website called Wait for Eight, that has all sorts of reviews on different devices, both watches and phones. We selected the Bark, but that's not, a promotion of the Bark, but that was what worked for us and our family. And we chose that because he cannot download any apps without our permission, and that phone actually uses AI to proactively warn us if they see any kind of bullying or any sexually explicit material or anything. And so instead of having to kind of, and I don't want to like look at what my kid's doing every day, because one, I don't have the time to do that constantly. And two, I want to allow him some level of independence where I'm not looking unless I feel like I need to. I at least know that I have the backup in terms of the AI material. Now, warning, I don't know what your kids listen to in terms of music at that age, but my kid listens to music where I do get warnings pretty regularly of lyrics. So you can get overwarned about this, but that's the phone that works for us.
Wow, I need to write this down. That's very interesting. I feel like you could do a podcast just on, like, I didn't realize that there were different devices. I thought like there's a burner phone and there's the iPhone and the Android and that's it. But
Oh no,
there's
there's tons. There's the pinwheel phone, there's all sorts. There's a whole market that has now come out because people are realizing that, there's a reason kids are getting phones for kind of parents to be in touch and access and
right.
safety. And there are real risks to kids by just handing them a phone that has no monitoring or anything. The other thing I will say is that you can decide when the phone is on and off. So the phone automatically switches off at 8 o'clock and doesn't come back on until 7 in the morning. So all of the concerns about
Mm,
kids being on their phones at night and not getting good sleep, like we don't have that worry, right? And we're able to block access to the internet during school hours.
wow.
So yeah, I will say one of the things that we did at Love 146, and you can go onto our website if you want, is we did create kind of an email chain of for parents to walk them through all of this stuff with giving them real tangible advice on how do you introduce technology and a phone. What do you do if you made a mistake and allowed them to get an app that in hindsight you're like, I need to remove this. How can you do that in a way that is building of a relationship and doesn't result, I mean, we can't promise, but hopefully minimizes the meltdown or the misunderstanding. So we are trying to proactively help parents understand things, realistic steps they can take to protect their children.
Wow, that is amazing. Because we're like, you're not getting a phone until you're like 18. Because I didn't know that there was just so much out there. My daughter really wants one of those smartwatches, and I'm like, I'm sorry, you have an AirTag. You have an AirTag watch, and that is what we'll put on you. But which we are realizing there's a delay, which is, it could be problematic because you're like, oh, they're home, and then they actually, weren't, or, so that's really interesting that there is that capability for parents to monitor, just have choices for their child to have, a phone. Um, so it sounds like a lot of your work is really influencing how you parent, and I feel like that advice is just priceless. Is there anything as far as like advice that you've learned that I didn't touch on that you would be so beneficial for parents?
I think that the other advice I would give to parents, and this is parents who have experienced their own form of trauma, which I think is many of us, right? There's many
Mhm.
of us that have had trauma in the past that we're bringing forth and hoping to not have happened to our kids, or that's influencing kind of our work with our kids, is that um, it's really important for you to kind of acknowledge that that exists, and not feel shame that that exists, like not feel shame about whatever occurred to you and how that might influence your parenting, good or bad. I think that the reality is that life is really hard and no parent has figured this out perfectly, even though there might be, guides out there that tell you they have the secret. They don't, right? We're all trying to figure this out. And the reality is that at the end of the day, we can't 100% protect them. Like, we
Yeah.
can't. And I think we have to allow ourselves to sit in that really difficult reality that we we're going to do the best we can. We're going to make the choices that we think are right at the time. We're not going to get it right all the time. And even if we do get it right all of the time, we still can't protect them 100%,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And that is the idea that we don't blame victims for what happens to them. There are bad people in the world, but, and there's a big but, we don't want to restrict our kids' lives, right? We
Right.
don't want to take what happened to us and have it restrict the opportunities that our kids can have to live the fullest life possible. So, whether that means we are struggling and we go back to therapy, whether that means we're struggling and we talk to our friends about what's happening, or our partner, struggling is okay. Struggling is part of this work as a parent, whether or not you've had trauma. But we need to make sure that we are self-aware enough to know when we need our own help and support.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for that, because I feel like, I mean, who isn't struggling in parenting? I mean, I don't know any parent that's not struggling. It can be a daily struggle, but oh, it's part of life, and and you get great advice like the advice that you gave today, and so completely grateful. Um, is there anything else you'd like to add? I know I feel like you're just such a wealth of information, and I feel like I'm missing so much, but I feel like is there
I will say our website, which is love146.org, has a ton of resources and materials. We really rely on word of mouth for people to learn about our work and the work that we're doing. We spend a lot of time thinking about resources that we can create, both for parents who support our work through individual giving as an advocacy, as well as parents that are the parents of the kids that we work with. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about, what does it mean to be a parent? How do you navigate this really complex subject and this really complex world? And I would just encourage people to go on our website, learn about the work that we're doing, and see if the resources can be of help to them, or even somebody else that they know that they can pass it along to.
Wow, yes, absolutely. And I will share all of that information because, I feel like it's vital. It's vital,
Yeah.
especially as parents. So, oh, Erin, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate all of the information that you provided, and thank you for taking the time today.
Thank you for having me. It really was a pleasure.
Absolutely. That was Erin Williamson, Chief Programs and Strategy Officer at Love146. You can find her info on love146.org, like she just mentioned. Also, October's issue of Authentic Insider is out. Check out Authentic Insider at traumasurvivorthriver.com. That's traumasurvivorthriver.com, as well as past episodes of a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my email list to get Authentic Insider magazine in your inbox monthly. Don't forget to join us next week. You've been listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast on Mental Health News Radio Network. I'm Lori Lee Binstock. Thanks for being a part of the conversation. Take care.